With all the stories making the headlines now this Sunday night, it's the ITV News.
Afghanistan's president flees the country as the Taliban takes control. In the space of just a few hours, it surged into the capital, Kabul, facing little resistance. Tonight, Taliban fighters are inside the presidential palace, effectively in charge of the country.
Everybody is scared, actually, so especially women, and they are experiencing actually democracy for years and years, and now if they are getting abandoned.
Also ahead, prayers and remembrance as Plymouth mourns the victims of Thursday's mass shooting. And
this is ITV News with Gamal Fahnbulleh.
good evening. It had been thought it would take the Taliban several weeks or even months to conquer Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. But today, its forces swept into the city in just a matter of hours, seizing control and forcing the presidents to flee. Armed Taliban fighters were even filmed seated inside the presidential palace as any hope of an orderly transition of power disappeared. Tonight, both Britain and America are sending in troops as they scramble to evacuate their citizens. From Kabul, our senior international correspondent, John Irvine, reports.
The Americans want to avoid a Saigon moment, but today there was more than a hint of comparable chaos here in Kabul. US helicopters flying over the city were dropping chaff flares for fear of Taliban anti-aircraft fire. The choppers were flying between the US embassy and the airport, which for foreigners is the only way out of the capital. At the city's banks, queues of people wanting to empty their accounts grew longer as news spread that the Taliban were entering Kabul from every direction. These pictures show Taliban leaders in the capital itself getting a warm welcome. How many people are genuine supporters and how many were frightened into this adulation isn't clear. The Taliban commander said Kabul had been conquered and that under Sharia law everyone's health and wealth would be secured. The speed of their advance has been shocking. They've achieved in days what the Americans predicted would take them weeks. Yet another thing the United States got wrong here. So, in the space of little more than a week, the Taliban have taken control of pretty much all of Afghanistan. Repeatedly, President Joe Biden has urged the Afghan army to fight, but it hasn't. The British and the Americans have spent billions trying to train and equip an effective Afghan army, but the policy has been an abject failure and allowed for the Islamist takeover of this country. The streets of Kabul are far quieter than normal, with many residents not daring to venture out. Women in particular are noticeable by their absence.
Everybody is scared, actually, so especially women, and they are experiencing actually democracy for years and years, and now if they are getting abandoned, then it will be something new for them. That's why they are scared.
Tonight, there's no doubt who rules Kabul. We watched as roving Taliban patrols stopped other vehicles to question drivers. All the while, you could hear American helicopters continuing the airlift from the US Embassy to the airport. The original American military intervention here was called Operation Enduring Freedom. What a tragic misnomer. In Afghanistan, freedom's sell-by date was today. John Irvine, ITV News, Kabul.
Well, the speed of the Taliban advance caught most Western leaders by surprise, and tonight they are trying to work out how to respond. Boris Johnson said Afghanistan must not be allowed to become a breeding ground for terror. But, as our global security editor, Rohit Kachi, reports, it is the Taliban that is holding all the cards.
The Afghan flag being taken down Live on television, the Taliban's takeover was completed tonight. Behind the grand desk at the presidential palace, commanders fitted microphones to address the world. In the armchairs once occupied by dignitaries, they looked like an amateur army, but these are the militants who took over a country in weeks. Then this statement from one of the men, a humiliating moment for the departing Americans.
I was in Guantanamo for 8 years.
A claim that he had been a Guantanamo Bay inmate for 8 years. From a prison to a palace, just as the Americans flee. For President Ghani, the journey went backwards today. In that same building just this morning, he was seen addressing officials about their pitiful attempts to repel the Taliban. He fled the country shortly afterwards. Many others are doing the same, an option unavailable to most people in this city. The French ambassador, inside a military helicopter, left the green zone towards relative safety, like many other foreign diplomats. And around the world, an acceptance that it's the Taliban now in charge.
I think it's very important that the West collectively should work together to get over to that new government, be it by the Taliban or anybody else, that nobody wants Afghanistan once again to be a breeding ground for terror.
16 Air Assault Brigade arrived in Kabul to help get British nationals out of this chaos. The US is considering sending more troops to help its citizens. It's still saying the Afghan army wasn't tough enough.
The fact of the matter is, we've seen that force has been unable to defend the country, and that has happened more quickly than we anticipated.
Although this is embarrassing for Americans, it is terrifying for many Afghans.
And Rohit joins us now. What sort of response might we see from other nations over the coming days?
Well, for most countries, the most pressing concern is getting their citizens out, the US and the UK included. These are complicated operations, logistical, military, political, diplomatic. And it's all happening in this small airport, an airport probably smaller than Luton, which is the closing door to the outside world. One British official told me this evening that it was like dealing both with a conflict and an earthquake together, because with an earthquake, things are unpredictable, and that's part of the problem. People didn't see this coming. Just a few days ago, the American intelligence community was talking about reaching this point in November, not this weekend. Tomorrow, there's a meeting of the UN Security Council. It'd be interesting to see how nations respond. An acceptance from diplomats here that China and Russia may well acknowledge the Taliban. For NATO countries, it's trickier because it's their withdrawal which has led to this position in part. The expectation is that they will ask for demands from the Taliban in terms of human rights, but this is really only day one of Taliban rule. OK,
Rohit, thank you. The number of people killed in the earthquake in Haiti has now risen to 724. Another 1,800 have been injured. The 7.2 magnitude quake hit the west of the Caribbean island yesterday, causing extensive damage. The search for survivors is still ongoing tonight. A month-long state of emergency has been declared. The family of Stephen Washington, one of the victims of Thursday night's mass shooting in Plymouth, said tonight their world had been turned upside down in the blink of an eye. Earlier, church services and prayers were said across the city to remember the 5 people who were killed. From Plymouth, Chloe Keedy reports.
In churches across Plymouth, today people sang, an act of sacred solidarity after a week that has brought this city so much sorrow and shock.
We are a small community, even though we're a city, and we do tend to come together, and I think that's important.
One of the victims of Thursday's attack was 59-year-old Stephen Washington, described tonight by his family as friendly and outgoing, a man who would help anyone at the drop of a hat. They said since the devastating events a couple of days ago, our world has been turned upside down in the blink of an eye, and he will be sorely missed by everyone who knew him. Also remembered today were Maxine Davison, Lee Martin and his 3-year-old daughter Sophie, and Kate Shepherd, killed as they went about their separate lives by Jake Davison, a 22-year-old with a gun and a grudge. At a church in Keyham, not far from where the horror unfolded, the priest read out a prayer written by the Bishop of Exeter, specially for this community.
God of compassion and love, let your peace rest gently on the people of Keyham.
It really hit me hard, and I felt as though I needed just some spiritual comfort.
But according to the local MP, this community will need more than comfort in the days and weeks ahead.
I especially want to see that support put in place before the schools reopen in a fortnight's time, to make sure our brilliant teachers and teaching assistants have the expert advice and the resources they need to be able to help people process this.
Today, though, they continued to show their love and support for the families of the people who died. Chloe Keedy, ITV News, Plymouth.
Funding for Britain's Olympic and Paralympic athletes is to be increased to £77 million a year. That's an annual rise of more than £20 million. The government's announcement follows the successful Games in Tokyo, where Team GB won 65 medals, including 22 golds. The money will help athletes build up to the Paris Games in 3 years' time. Now, finally, the absence of Harry Kane didn't stop Tottenham pulling off a stunning upset against Manchester City today. Kane was left out because he may be about to sign for the Premier League champions, who've already spent big money this summer. But Spurs show that City might not have it all their own way, as Beth Fisher now reports.
Well, that's how you greet a £100 million footballer.
It's been matters off the pitch between these two teams that have dominated the pre-match headlines. And Manchester City came to London having won their previous 10 season openers. The champions dominating the opening period, with Grealish showing just why he deserved the record price tag. But despite all of Manchester City's possession, they failed to take advantage. Mahrez's efforts summing up City's attempts, and their need for a striker perhaps.
Reached for it, Riyad Mahrez couldn't quite wrap his left foot around it.
In the second half, Spurs grew even more into the game, spurred on by the home supporters. And whilst they might be missing their main man, it was business as usual for Son, who created his own masterpiece.
It's found its way in!
And the 3 points for Tottenham.
And Tottenham start the season!
But the question still remains tonight, which one of these teams will Harry Kane line up for next? Beth Fisher, ITV News.
And that is all from us this evening. From me and all the team here, a very good night. Bye-bye.